To make a living, Gene Simmons always said things that other people were afraid to say. He was proud of the fact that he was A and called himself that. He was proud of the money, the women, and his power, which he never said sorry for. It was just part of the show for years. It came with being a star. But in early 2025, he made a comparison that was so bad that even his biggest fans stopped talking about it. After that, there were lawsuits, claims, and a crash that no one could fully explain. He is finally learning the truth about the man behind the demon. Gene Simmons came into the world on August 25, 1949, in Haifa as Chaim Witz. He spent most of his childhood in Tirat Carmel, a nearby small working-class town. There, life felt simple and limited, shaped by the kind of routine that shapes a child before he even realizes it. But the real weight in that house wasn't from the town or the money. It has roots in history. Ferenc Witz and Flora Klein were his parents. They were Hungarian Jews who had lived through the persecution of the Nazis. Flora, his mother, had been to Auschwitz as a teenager and lost most of her family there. Those memories didn't stay in the past. They lived with them in the house. They showed up in stories, in silences, and in the way that just getting through each day seemed to be enough. That setting shaped him early on. As a child, he heard stories about stock cars, numbers on arms, hunger, fear, and how people's lives were utterly random in terms of who lived and who died. When kids hear stories like that, they might just feel sad. But for Chaim, they seemed to go down a lot more. They taught him that safety wasn't always there. They taught him how to be in charge. They showed him that money wasn't just for fun. It was for safety. In the end, his parents' marriage fell apart, and his mother raised him by herself. They changed their name to her family name and brought him into a life that was already scarred. After that, they were known as the Kleins. Even that change meant something. That made me remember that the past wasn't gone and that my identity could change when life made it so. The move changed everything. They sold almost everything they owned in Israel in 1958 and bought 2 one-way tickets to the United States. She was risking something that must have been both scary and important to her. She and her son flew into Idlewild Airport, which then changed its name to JFK. Chaim was still a boy, only 8 or 9 years old, and what he was about to see was not the dreamy America that people from far away had imagined. It was Queens. The rooms were small, the rent was low, and there were times when money was tight enough to see every cost. They started out living in Jackson Heights and then moved to other working-class areas of the borough. They made a life for themselves with very little. Chaim felt shocked almost right away. He didn't speak English very well. Things people said to him at school were hard for him to understand. He answered in Hebrew and Hungarian on his first day at a public school in New York, making other kids laugh. That moment can either break a child or make him stronger. It looks like it did both for him for a while. He knew how embarrassing it was. He could feel how far away he was from everyone else. Something inside him locked up at the same time. He was going to rule the world. He was going to quickly learn its language, rhythm, and codes. He taught himself in the most American way possible. He learned not through fancy lessons but by taking in everything he could. He read old picture books. He watched old episodes of TV. He paid attention to radio DJs and copied the way they spoke. He looked at America every day as if it were a code that could be broken. This was more important than learning new words. His goal was to learn how to fit in. He was trying to figure out how heroes looked, sounded, and got people's attention. It's possible that Gene Simmons was already being made in Queens, long before the makeup, stage boots, and fame. In the mid-1960s, when he was in his teens, that drive only grew stronger. He didn't have an easy or exciting start to his life. While he was in school, he took whatever low-paying jobs he could find. He worked in a store for a while. After Sullivan County Community College and Richmond College, he worked for a short time as a 6th-grade teacher in Harlem. That information shocks people because it doesn't fit with the picture the world later saw, but it fits with how his early life went. He kept going. His tests kept coming up. He kept looking for a way to get to a bigger place. He could already feel the music pulling at him through it all. From 1964 to 1965, he played in bands in New York City with names like Lynx or Missing Links, Long Island Sounds, and Bullfrog Beer. It's not like these bands were famous. They were rough, semi-professional groups looking for cheap gigs in Queens and Manhattan, playing for small crowds and little pay. Still, he went into those nights with a strangely sharp focus. There are a lot of young artists who dream during practice and mess up during shows. As Chaim turned into Gene, he paid close attention. He saw which songs made people clap, which hooks made a bar owner want to book them again, and which parts of the show seemed to sell. For him, a 3-minute song was more than just music. It was a test. If you were willing to listen, the crowd told you something every night. One of the things that helped him become successful later on was that habit. Not only was he learning how to act, but he was also learning how desire works. He learned how people react to sound, pictures, time, and doing something over and over again. That is, he began to see rock music as both art and business, even though he didn't yet have the power to make that idea bigger. His new life also happened in stages. When the boy born Chaim Witz got to America, he changed his last name to that of his mother and became Gene Klein. The choice was important. Gene was short and easy for people who speak English to say. It helped him get used to living in a new country without making every teacher or stranger trip over his name Chaim. Then, in the late 1960s, he took another step back and dropped Klein. It was replaced by Gene Simmons, a name that was said to have been partly taken from the rockabilly singer Jumpin' Gene Simmons. It had a clean American sound and was ready for a marquee. It wasn't a mistake. He knew that names affect how people feel about you at first. He wanted one that could go places. He wasn't just trying to fit in with Americans anymore. He was making a better version of himself that would help him get ahead in life. It all came together. Black hair, a harder look, and a growing sense of who they were as a performer. He wasn't just thinking about songs. He had pictures, memories, and ownership on his mind. A stage name could turn into a brand. A face could stand for something. People later talked a lot about the urge to make money off of identity, but it was already there. He met Stanley Harvey Eisen, who would become Paul Stanley, through their shared musician friend Steve Coronel in the small rock scene in New York. This was the next big turn in his life. Both men's lives changed when they met because they saw something important in each other. They had big plans. They were getting antsy. They were not satisfied with small-time gigs and unfinished plans. They started a band around 1970. At first, it was called Rainbow, but soon it changed its name to Wicked Lester. Stanley played guitar, Coronel played lead guitar, Brooke Ostrander played piano, and Tony Zarella played drums. Simmons played bass. In 1971, Wicked Lester signed a deal with Epic and made an album at Electric Lady Studios, which is known for being where Jimi Hendrix worked. That should have felt like the start for a young band. It was in a way. It also didn't work out. The record company put the album on hold because they thought the band's mix of folk, pop, and rock music was too. That would have crushed a lot of musicians. More useful things were done by Simmons and Stanley. It taught them a lesson. They knew that talent wasn't enough on its own, and that style without a clear name could get lost in the crowd. They needed a sound that was louder. Their edges needed to be sharper. The idea had to be something that people could see at a glance and remember. This led to the end of Wicked Lester in 1972 and the start of something much more planned. By January 1973, they were back together as Kiss. That change wasn't just for looks, it was planned out. Much more thought went into making the band now, and Simmons was at the center of that change. Kiss played their first show on January 30, 1973, at the Popcorn Club in Queens. The room wasn't very big. Reports say that there were less than 10 paid customers and some bored people at the bar. The night didn't seem like it would lead to a power. On that stage, though, something important did happen. Someone barely noticed when 4 unknown New Yorkers walked into a room full of people who already seemed bigger than life. Gene was already making the character that would make him famous. In the beginning, his makeup was rough and not quite right, but the idea was there. He worked on being loomingly still while his bass hung low. The band played several sets and made about $50. He even tried fire breathing early on with lighter fluid, which scared the owner of the club. That little thing said a lot. He was already going above and beyond what a local rock band should be. He wanted a show. He liked danger. He wanted people to think that something strange had come into the room. The decision about makeup quickly became important. Simmons and Paul Stanley didn't want Kiss to look like just another bunch of bar bands in a city that was full of them. They wanted comic book characters to come to life. It is a mix of a monster, a story, and an enlarged self. Simmons drew the faces of his demons with sharp black lines and eye shapes that made him look scary and almost supernatural. He added tall platform boots, armor that looked like bat wings, and a tongue that flashed out in a way that was meant to be funny. It was dangerous for him to try fire breathing and blood spitting, but he did it anyway, practicing in small New York spaces. Mistakes, burns, and choking. It all could have gone badly. He kept going though because he knew that fear and interest go together very well. Kiss didn't give up, and on March 19, 1975, their third studio album, Dressed to Kill, came out on Casablanca Records. There was a lot of pressure on the label to do well. Even though the record was short, it had the song that would change the band's life. Rock and Roll All Night. The song did not become a hit right away when it was recorded in the studio. It was built on Paul Stanley's riff and Gene's work to make the chorus line into a party theme. Still, it showed what Kiss was becoming at its core. It was clear, loud, easy to say, and made for big groups. Next, the live version on Alive made it a top 20 hit in the US. After that, they always did it. As the demon that spat blood, Gene led thousands of people into that chorus night after night until it stopped feeling like a song and became an experience that everyone shared. After that big step forward, the next big step could happen. Kiss's fourth studio album, Destroyer, came out on March 15, 1976. It was produced by Bob Ezrin. After Alive turned things around for the band, they had more energy and more money this time. In early April, Destroyer launched at number 81 on the Billboard 200. By mid-May, it had climbed to number 11 and stayed there for 84 weeks. It won them their first platinum award in the US. There was no loss of the group's core in songs like Beth, Detroit Rock City, and Shout It Out Loud. They could play hard rock, big choruses, and even soft spots without making the sound weaker. In front of the crowd, Gene kept pushing the monster farther. He got to the top on elevated platforms. As the songs began, he breathed fire. He made himself look very big, very dangerous, and very hard to miss. Kiss wasn't just a rock band winning over fans at that point. There was a lot going on. Simmons may have known more than anyone else how important that show really was. From the middle of the 1970s on, he spoke of Kiss less as a band and more as a brand. Other groups mostly thought about albums, shows, and songs. Simmons thought about who owned what he could license, sell, or make last after the show was over was what he thought about. A lot of different things like boots, posters, comic books, lunchboxes, pinball machines, face paint, and logos all became part of the growing Kiss machine. At some point, there were over 1,000 licensed products. Around the beginning of the 2000s, the group was linked to the sales of more than $1 billion worth of goods and tens of millions of albums. That thought changed the rock business. Fans bought more than just songs. They were paying to get into a world. Simmons was very protective of that world. He cared about trademarks. Logo was important. The demon's face was important. It was important that the band's gear and set design looked good. He knew very well that picture could be just as useful as sound if it was carefully made and protected well. Next came one of the bravest parts of the Kiss story. After 10 years of covering their faces with makeup, the band went on MTV on June 18, 1983, and showed who they were. It had been since 1973 since they had played in public without makeup. Simmons was taking a risk when he took off the demon mask because it was one of his most recognizable looks in rock. Still, the time made sense. After Dynasty and Unmasked, album sales went down, and even the darker creatures of the night wasn't enough to get them back on track. Things had changed in the music world. MTV had value. Glam metal was on the rise. Now being seen was more important than before. Unmasking became a way to stay alive, a way for Kiss to live on in the modern world. The band changed again after that. When Lick It Up came out in September 1983, it was their first gold record in a long time. The group of people around them kept changing. Vinnie Vincent was here and gone. Before getting sick, Mark St. John filled in for a short time. Bruce Kulick came in and helped keep the group together. During this time, Simmons also looked into movie parts and other activities that made him more well-known outside of the band. Simmons made sure that his face, name, and persona stayed in the public eye, while Paul Stanley was more in charge of day-to-day musical matters. Eventually, nostalgia brought back the old picture in a big way. As part of a full reunion tour, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss showed up in full 1970s gear on the deck of the USS Intrepid in New York on April 16, 1996. People in dozens of countries saw the moment, and they responded right away. There were almost 40,000 ticket sales for the first show in just 47 minutes. About 40,000 people were at Detroit's Tiger Stadium on June 28, 1996, when the Alive Worldwide Tour began. Kiss was the most popular musical act of that year, with 192 sold-out shows that brought in tens of millions of dollars. It was easy to understand. The old image was still very powerful, and the demon could still lead a group of people. Kiss had a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame by June 13, 2001. Simmons saw a lot of meaning in that moment. He was the son of a Holocaust survivor and had just moved to New York. He didn't speak English and didn't know where he fit in. He helped make a figure that is now part of American pop culture history. The band had sold more than 100 million albums around the world and over 35 million albums in the US at that point. Not many American rock bands had left such a big mark on history. Then, on April 10, 2014, at Brooklyn's Barclays Center, the 4 founding members were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The honor came a long time after they were first qualified, and the night was tense because there were still disagreements within the group. Only the original members of the band were recognized, later members were not. The band couldn't play that night because of disagreements. Still, the admission proved something that had been clear for a long time. Kiss had been there. Gene Simmons had been around. Remaking things new was what the immigrant boy from Queens did for a living. He taught himself American through comic books and TV shows. Gene Simmons has made controversy a part of the show for years now. Many people now expect a storm every time he speaks because it is so connected to how he is seen by the public. The fact that he kept going after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was one of the strongest signs of that. Simmons has been upset for more than 10 years that hip-hop artists should not be allowed to join. He has said that rap doesn't speak the same language as him and that hip-hop and disco belong in a different genre. He already said in 2014 that rock would die after the original giants were gone, and the way he said things made me think of a man watching over the gates of a world he thought was leaving him. Then, in 2016, NWA came in, and Ice Cube defended hip-hop's place in that story. Simmons could have changed his tone at that point, or come to terms with the fact that rock history had grown beyond the old guitar model he loved. So he pushed himself even more. He could not agree with her that rock music should stay in clubs with guitars. Even after all these years, he still thought the hall had gone astray. Over time, that stance made him a symbol of old-school resistance. He was seen as an old rock warrior who was still fighting a battle that most people had moved on from. Simmons rarely sees backlash as a warning sign, so that trend is important. It's like fire to him. When he gets angry about something, he often says it over and over again until the criticism becomes part of the story. That happened again when he said one of the most controversial things he had said in years in early 2025. He talked about how terrestrial radio works in the United States, especially the fact that artists don't get direct performance fees when their songs are played on those stations. Simmons said that a song could be played on the radio millions of times without the singer or band getting paid. Only the songwriters and publishers would get paid. He wanted to show that the system was taking advantage of people's money. He should have used words that made people angry in a different way. He said that musicians today were treated worse than slaves. The response was quick and strong. Some people on social media thought the connection was gross. People who spoke out against it said it was disrespectful to history and morally careless. Opinion pieces criticized the comparison for using slavery as a cheap way to make a point about money. Simmons didn't back down from the fight about artists' rights in the middle of all that. He wouldn't give up on the main issue. Later, when the reaction kept getting worse, he said he might have picked better words. The anger over the event didn't really go away even after that. The damage had already been done. What people thought about was not how radio royalties worked on a technical level. What stayed was the picture of Simmons trying to find the worst possible comparison. Then he tried to stick to the bigger point after everyone in the room had turned against him. Some people who don't like Gene Simmons say that the problem is bigger than just what he believes. It's how willing he seems to be to hurt people to make a point. Those complaints got even stronger when legal trouble came up. In December 2017, a female broadcaster sued him in Los Angeles Superior Court for something that she said happened at one of the restaurants in the Rock and Brews chain that he co-owns. The complaint said that she went to the San Bernardino County location for an interview and was sexually harassed while she was there. The accusations were clear and upsetting. She said Simmons put her hand on his knee, flicked her throat hard, reached for her behind, and turned normal questions into sexual hints. Simmons said the claims were false and that he would protect his image. But the case gave critics something more important than just another bad quote. There was a bigger point being made that the aggressive character he played on stage wasn't always separate from the real man. Stories about him breaking the rules have been around for years, even after the lawsuit was over. This means that every new accusation adds to the sense of doubt that already exists. For many, that trend has told them more about him than any single thing he has said. People start to read the character in a different way. His fiercest critics say that the tongue-wagging demon from Kiss S stops looking like a play and starts looking like a shield that bad behavior can hide behind. That move is important, whether it's fair or not. Every interview, joke, and news story feels heavier when a celebrity's image starts to harden around behavior instead of music. Simmons doesn't seem to have gotten away from that darker picture. In fact, by 2024, he was openly on board with it. The man said, "I'm a so what," in a podcast conversation, and used that line as if it were a goal statement. He said that at age 75, he had taken back the abuse and made it a part of who he was. He even referred to his 2004 solo record, titled as if to show that none of this was new and that he was okay with being disliked for a long time. The label didn't have any power over him after he accepted it and wore it with pride. He talked about it as a sign of power, and he used the same tone to talk about money. Of course he does things for money, he said without any doubt. Then he told them it didn't matter how much he makes. Some people find that kind of honesty interesting because it seems so rare. There are a lot of rich entertainers who try to make money while acting like they are above it all. Simmons often doesn't bother with the act. There is something scary about the way he says it, though. He can sound almost proud of taking away the softness, as if honest self-interest should be praised for being given without any masks. This is one reason why his fans are still so split on him. Some of his fans hear the honest truth in what he says. Someone else hears arrogance that has been honed into a brand. By the 2020s, it was impossible to miss that gap. One side saw a cruel troublemaker who was crazy about money, fame, and building his own legend. They looked at how he had bragged about sleeping with thousands of women in the past. They looked at the cases. They looked at the pricey kiss meet and greet packages, the high-end souvenirs, and the endless ways that nostalgia can be used to make money. And they saw a man taking every penny from the kingdom he helped build. There was more to Simmons for them than just controversy. He looked like a rock star in every way, and he had turned everything into a deal. Something else was seen by the other side. They saw a tough businessman who had helped paint a bar band's face and turn it into a billion-dollar machine. It was heard that he talked about piracy, streaming, and how the music business makes lazy assumptions. And they thought he was telling them uncomfortable facts that other people were avoiding. Simmons wasn't friendly with these fans, but he was honest. They didn't need him to be nice. He had to be smart, good at what he did, and not afraid of anything. Almost every time he speaks in public, that strain shows up. People on social media keep responding to what he said in different ways. There are people who say he has finally gone too far. Some people just shrug and say, "That's Gene being Gene." It says a lot just by itself. It seems like being angry has become a part of the ritual, and that the man in the middle of it knows how to keep it going. After that, there was more controversy, plus age and physical danger, which were harder to say goodbye to. Gene Simmons was 76 years old in 2025. From the outside, his constant traveling was starting to look different because of his health worries. What looked like proof of stamina at first turned out to be more of a risk. He already did that in 2023, when he had to stop a show to get medical help on stage because he was thirsty. Even so, he said he was fine after a short break backstage and came back to finish the show. That choice was in line with what he has always done. He doesn't give up. He keeps moving. He doesn't want to look weak. But those instincts can look very different when the body is at a point in its life where being dehydrated, having a hard heart, or having side effects from medicine can turn a short episode into a major threat. During the long last part of KISS, the stress of constantly traveling was already clear. The pandemic hit the farewell machine in 2021. Not even that huge business was safe from the trouble. Simmons tested positive for COVID-19 on his 72nd birthday, August 25, 2021, even though he had been fully vaccinated. Because of this, the end of the road tour had to be put on hold and put under quarantine at a time when it had already been delayed for months. The episode showed what was really going on behind the flames, blood, and arena-scale glamour. Aging rock stars who go on global tours have to live on buses, planes, hotels, and venues that are always full, and they risk getting sick every day. The KISS machine did not really stop, though. What that meant about how strong the brand had become was that it stopped, changed, and then played again. There was no happy finish to the goodbye, not even a virus that messed up the whole world. The ending that wasn't clear became part of the bigger story. People were told that the end of the road tour was the last chance to see KISS in full force. Fans were told that this was the last goodbye. When COVID was late, the schedule got longer. There were more goodbye legs. Dates went on until the middle of the decade. Even though KISS's last show was in New York in 2023, it didn't feel like the end when Simmons kept coming back into the center. By April 2026, he had set up more solo shows in California and Nevada. He also had a 5-day resort stay in Cancun planned for October 20th through October 25th, 2026. That's when retirement stopped looking like the end of the road. It looked like an ad that did its job. It was early October 2025 when things got the most scary. Simmons' Lincoln Navigator flew across several lanes of traffic on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu on a Tuesday and hit a parked car. Then came the emergency calls. When deputies got there, they saw that the 76-year-old man was still alive. It was said that he passed out or blacked out behind the wheel before the crash. He was taken to a nearby hospital, checked out, and then sent home. Officials said no one was seriously hurt, which was a good thing because a big truck crossing multiple lanes on one of California's roughest roads could have been very dangerous. But Simmons tried to calm things down almost as soon as the story came out. He told his friends on social media that it was just a minor accident and that he was fine. If more information hadn't come after, that message might have worked. He told Shannon Tweed, his wife, that he had recently changed prescription drugs and doctors had told him to drink a lot more water, which she said he hates doing. This changed the whole story. She said that the most likely reason was that she was dehydrated and taking new medicine, which turned her expensive SUV into a dangerous projectile. The event stopped sounding like a small traffic accident all of a sudden. A 76-year-old man who had already been showing signs of dehydration in public seemed to have had a health failure that could have been avoided. The questions got more pointed when that version of the story came into it. Simmons, did you think he was old enough? Were the plans still being made as if he were decades younger? Was the failure to slow down beginning to look like a bad idea? His answer made things even less comfortable. After the accident, he tried to lighten the mood by making fun of it online by saying that bad drivers are more likely to have these kinds of things happen to them. The line was meant to make fun of itself. Instead, it hit a lot of people with dark comedy. A man passed out on a busy highway, crossed several lanes, and hit a parked car. He then made a joke about being a bad driver. Reports also connected that statement to talk about a different driving case connected to Sunset Boulevard. This made the joke feel less like a joke and more like a disturbing sign of a pattern. The picture that stuck with them was tough to get rid of, seeing an old rock star quickly avoid a disaster and then move on to the next job. There was now another legal cloud in the sky. A lawsuit about an accident on Sunset Boulevard in July 2024 said that a Tesla and a car belonging to the Simmons family were in a serious accident. Evan Brenner, the plaintiff, said the impact hurt him badly, sent shockwaves through his nervous system, caused him to be in pain all the time, and meant he would need more treatment in the future. He also said the accident made it hard for him to work and asked for money to cover his hospital bills and lost wages. With that kind of language, the case went from being a simple traffic argument to something much bigger. On the other hand, Shannon Tweed Simmons told a very different story. She said Gene wasn't even in the car, that it was a very small accident, and that no one was hurt other than the paint being scratched. Even the Tesla driver seemed nice to her at the scene of the accident and later over text. When put next to each other, the two versions were hard to understand. One person told of being seriously hurt and having their life thrown off. The other person talked about a small accident that turned into a huge lawsuit. In a world where fame, the law, and media attention all mix so easily, the difference between the two versions became part of the drama.